The stars had never looked so cold. Admiral Sarakin stood on the bridge of her flagship, the Eternal Light, and watched her fleet die. Through the massive viewing window, she could see the broken ships of the Volanthi Third Expeditionary Fleet floating in the darkness. Some were on fire. Some were completely dark, their power cores dead. Some were just pieces now, scattered across thousands of kilometers of empty space. 6 days ago, she had commanded 300 ships. Now, only 47 remained. The Volanthi were a proud species. They had sailed the stars for 10,000 years. Their crystalline ships were considered the most beautiful in the galaxy. Their technology was advanced, their culture was ancient, and their warriors were brave. None of that mattered against the Drath Collective. Sarakin turned all 4 of her eyes to the tactical display. The holographic image showed the enemy fleet surrounding them like a cage. 212 Drath warships, their ugly biomechanical hulls pulsing with dark energy. They were waiting. They knew the Volanthi had nowhere to go. "Admiral," her first officer said quietly. His name was Kethro, and he had served with her for 30 years. His bioluminescent markings, which normally glowed a calm blue, were now flickering with fear. "The Silver Dawn has lost life support. Captain Velon is requesting permission to evacuate his crew to the Starweaver." "Granted," Sarakin said. Her voice was steady, but inside, she felt hollow. The Silver Dawn had been one of their best ships. Now it was just another tomb. She walked to the communication station and looked at the young officer sitting there. "Any responses to our distress signal?" The officer shook his head. His eyes would not meet hers. "The consortium says they cannot send reinforcements. The war with the Eastern clans requires all their resources." He paused. "The hegemony has declined to comment. And the architects?" "They said." The officer swallowed hard. "They said that intervention in conflicts between younger species is not their policy. They wished us peaceful passage to the next life." Sarakin closed her eyes. The architects were the oldest species in the galaxy. They had technology that could end this battle in seconds. But they never interfered. They just watched and recorded and did nothing while entire civilizations burned. "There is one more thing, Admiral," the officer said. His voice was strange now, confused. "We received a response from the Sol system." Sarakin opened her eyes. "Sol? The human homeworld?" "Yes, Admiral. They received our distress signal. They say they are coming." For a moment, the bridge was silent. Then Catherall laughed, but there was no humor in it. "The humans? They barely discovered faster-than-light travel a century ago. Their ships are made of metal and fire. What could they possibly do against the Drath?" Sarakin did not laugh. She had read the reports about humans. Strange creatures, soft and fragile, who lived on a small blue world at the edge of the galaxy. They had no natural weapons, no armor, no telepathy. By all measures, they should never have survived to reach the stars. But they had. And something about them made the older species nervous. "When will they arrive?" Sarakin asked. "Unknown, Admiral." Their message was short. It simply said, "We're coming. Hold on, hold on." As if it were that simple. As if the Drath would wait. The tactical display flickered, and new readings appeared. The Drath fleet was moving. 3 of their largest ships were breaking formation, heading toward the Volanthi with weapons charging. "Admiral," Kethro said urgently, "they're beginning another attack run. We don't have enough power for full shields. If they hit us now—" "I know," Sarakin said. She straightened her back and lifted her chin. If she was going to die, she would die like a Volanthi admiral. With dignity. With honor. All ships form defensive pattern. Put the damaged vessels in the center. Our ships with working weapons will take the outer positions. Admiral, that will expose our combat-ready ships to direct fire. Yes, but it might buy time for the wounded to escape. Escape to where, Admiral? Sirikin did not answer. There was no answer. The nearest friendly space was 40 light-years away. Their jump drives were damaged. They could not run. The Drath ships grew larger on the display. They were ugly things, grown rather than built. Their hulls were made of living tissue fused with metal. Their weapons were organic, firing concentrated biological acid that could eat through any armor. All hands, prepare for combat, Sirikin announced to the fleet. Today, we show the collective what it means to fight the Volanthi. We may not survive, but we will make them remember us. Across the fleet, her people responded. Weapons came online. Shields flickered to full power, even though everyone knew they would not last. Pilots ran to their fighters, knowing they would probably not return. The Drath opened fire. The first shots hit the Moonblade, one of their oldest cruisers. The acid weapons burned through its hull like water through paper. The ship exploded in a ball of white flame, taking 400 Volanthi souls with it. Sirikin gripped the railing of her command platform and forced herself to watch. She would not look away. She would not hide. Return fire, she ordered. All weapons. The Volanthi ships answered with beams of crystallized light, their signature weapons. The beams struck the Drath ships, but the biomechanical armor absorbed most of the damage. Only one enemy vessel was destroyed. 3 Volanthi ships died for that single kill. This was not a battle. It was a slaughter. Admiral, the communications officer called out. Another message from the Sol system. What does it say? The officer looked up at her, and for the first time in days, there was something in his eyes that might have been hope. They say 12 hours. We will be there in 12 hours. Just hold on. 12 hours. An eternity in combat. An impossibility. But Sirikin found herself nodding. Reply to them. Tell them we will try. She turned back to the battle and watched another of her ships die. The Drath were not hurrying. They were enjoying this. They knew they had all the time in the world. The humans were coming. Sirikin did not know if they could help. She did not know if anyone could help. But for the first time since the ambush, she felt something other than despair. She felt the smallest spark of hope. And in the darkness of space, surrounded by enemies, that spark was enough to keep fighting. The Supreme Hive Commander of the Drath Collective had no name. Names were for individual creatures, and the Drath were not individuals. They were one mind spread across many bodies, one hunger given form in flesh and metal. For 6 days, the Hive Commander had played with its prey. The Volanthi were broken. Their fleet was in pieces. Their admirals still fought, still gave orders, still pretended there was hope. The Hive Commander found this amusing in its cold way. Soon, the harvest would begin. Volanthi bodies would be absorbed into the collective. Their ships would be taken apart and studied. Their home coordinates would be extracted from their computers, and then the Drath would visit their worlds. The collective was patient. It had destroyed hundreds of species. The Volanthi would simply be the next. Then space itself screamed. The Hive Commander felt it through every one of its sensor bodies. Something was wrong with reality. Something was pushing through from somewhere else, and it was not using any form of travel the collective recognized. A tear appeared in the blackness between stars. Not a wormhole, not a jump point. A wound in the universe itself, bleeding strange radiation. And through that wound came ships. 17 of them. Small compared to Drath vessels. Their hulls were dark, scarred, burned by whatever method they had used to cross the void. They were made of simple metals, crude alloys that the collective had stopped using 10,000 years ago. Their designs were ugly, all sharp angles and visible weapon mounts. The Hive commander analyzed them instantly. Primitive construction. Basic propulsion systems. No energy shields visible. Power readings that were laughably weak compared to collective vessels. Threat assessment, 3.2%. Then one of the ships began broadcasting on all frequencies. Volanti Fleet, this is Captain Elena Vasquez of the United Earth Navy ship Spite. The voice was calm, almost casual. Sorry we're late. Traffic was murder. On the bridge of the Eternal Light, Admiral Sarikin stared at the display in disbelief. The human ships had arrived. They had actually arrived. Admiral, Kethro whispered. They have only 17 vessels. And they're so small. What can they possibly do? Sirikin did not answer. She was looking at the human flagship, the one called Spite. It was an ugly thing, covered in weapons and armor. There was no grace to it, no art. It looked like something designed by people who expected to fight and did not care about beauty. She opened a channel. Captain Vasquez, this is Admiral Sirikin of the Volanti Third Fleet. We are grateful for your arrival, but you must understand the situation. The Drath outnumber you greatly. Your ships will be destroyed. There was a pause. Then, a woman's face appeared on the screen. She was human, with brown skin and dark eyes. A scar ran across her left cheek. She was smiling. Admiral, we received your distress call 12 days ago. We crossed 43 light years to get here. Burned out 2 drive cores and lost a lot of good coffee. She leaned forward. We didn't come all this way to run. But your ships will do just fine, ma'am. Now, if you don't mind, I need to have a conversation with these ugly bastards. The channel closed. The Hive commander had been listening. It processed the human captain's words and found them illogical. 17 primitive ships against 200? The calculation was simple. The humans would die. It ordered the nearest hunting pack to eliminate the newcomers. 20 draft vessels changed course, their weapons powering up. The human ships did not retreat. They charged. Sirikin could not believe what she was seeing. Human vessels were accelerating toward the Drath at speeds that should have been impossible for their technology. They were weaving through space in patterns that no sane pilot would attempt. They were heading straight into the teeth of the enemy fleet. They're going to die, Kethral said. This is suicide. The first Drath ship opened fire. Acid projectiles streaked toward the human vessel Grudge. The Grudge did not dodge. It did not raise shields because it had no shields. Instead, it simply kept coming. The acid hit its hull and burned through the outer layer, but the ship did not slow down. Then the Grudge fired back. Sirikin had studied human weapons. She knew they were primitive. They used solid projectiles instead of energy beams. They still employed explosive chemicals. Their technology was thousands of years behind the rest of the galaxy. She had not understood what that meant. The Grudge fired a single projectile. It was a solid piece of metal, nothing more. But it was moving at nearly 1/5 the speed of light. The Drath ship simply ceased to exist. The impact released more energy than a small star. The biomechanical hull did not burn or melt. It vaporized. Pieces of it struck other Drath vessels, damaging them. What was that? Kethral gasped. I think, Sirikin said slowly, the humans just showed us what a rock can do when you throw it fast enough. The battle had changed. The human ships were among the Drath now, firing constantly. Their weapons were different from anything the Volanti had seen. Railguns that threw metal at impossible speeds. Missiles that carried nuclear warheads. Energy weapons that seemed crude but hit with devastating force. And the humans did not stop. One ship, the Petty Revenge, took a direct hit that tore off a quarter of its hull. The atmosphere vented into space. Crew members died. But the ship kept fighting, kept firing, kept killing. The Hive commander revised its threat assessment, then revised it again, then again. The humans were not fighting like any species the collective had ever encountered. They did not retreat when damaged. They did not surrender when the odds were against them. They seemed to get angrier the more they were hurt. And they were laughing. The Hive commander could hear their communications. They were making jokes. They were insulting the Drath. One pilot, his ship on fire and his life support failing, had broadcast his final words. "Hey, Commander, tell my wife I died doing what I loved." Being a massive pain in someone's ass. Then he had rammed his burning ship into a Drath cruiser's engine core. The Hive commander felt something it had never felt before. It took a long moment to identify the sensation. It was doubt. On the Eternal Light, Admiral Sarakin watched the impossible battle unfold. The humans were losing ships. They were taking terrible damage. But they were also tearing through the Drath fleet like nothing she had ever seen. A new transmission came through. It was Captain Vasquez, her face now streaked with blood from a wound on her forehead. Her bridge was filled with smoke. Behind her, crew members were shouting orders and fighting fires. She was still smiling. "Admiral Sarakin, I suggest you pull your fleet back. We work better when we have room to move." She wiped blood from her eye. "And ma'am, thank you for holding on. We've got it from here." Sarakin could not speak. She simply nodded. The humans had arrived, and everything had changed. Admiral Sarakin had seen many battles in her long career. She had studied the tactics of 100 species. She thought she understood war. She was wrong. The humans did not fight like anyone else. They did not follow the rules that every civilized species had agreed upon for thousands of years. They did not manage their resources carefully. They did not retreat when damaged. They did not seem to care if they lived or died. And it was terrifying. "Admiral," her science officer said, his voice shaking, "I have been analyzing the human ships. They have no energy shields. None at all." "That's impossible," Kethril said. "How do they survive in combat without shields?" "They don't always survive. They just keep fighting until they can't anymore. Their ships are built differently than ours. They have multiple redundant systems. Their hulls are thick with simple armor. When one part is destroyed, the rest keeps working." On the display, the human ship Grudge proved the science officer's point. A Drath weapon had torn away its entire forward section. Half the ship was simply gone. Atmosphere poured into space. Emergency bulkheads sealed. And the remaining half of the ship rotated, brought its weapons to bear, and kept firing. "This is madness," Kethril whispered. "No," Sarakin said quietly. "This is something else. I just don't know what." She opened a channel to the Spite. "Captain Vasquez, your ship the Grudge has lost half its structure. Order them to retreat. We can take their crew aboard." Vasquez's face appeared on screen. She looked worse than before. A bandage covered part of her head. One of her arms was in a sling, but her eyes were bright, almost wild. "Admiral, the Grudge has weapons and engines. That means she can still fight. Captain Chun won't leave while there's still Drath to kill." She paused. "Besides, he owes me 50 credits. Can't collect from a dead man." Sarakin did not understand. "You joke about death?" "Ma'am, if we didn't laugh, we'd go crazy." Vasquez grinned. "Actually, some of us went crazy a long time ago. The Navy just doesn't do psych evaluations anymore." The channel closed. The battle continued. The Hive commander had lost 40 ships now. 40 vessels destroyed by 17 primitive craft. This was not possible. This violated every calculation, every prediction, every model the collective had ever developed. It studied the humans more closely, trying to understand. Their ships used chemical rockets for maneuvering. Their weapons were based on physics so simple that most species had abandoned them in their first century of spaceflight. Their armor was just metal, layers of steel and titanium and ceramics. But they used these primitive tools in ways the collective had never imagined. Their railguns could accelerate a projectile to speeds that turned a simple metal slug into a weapon of mass destruction. Their nuclear missiles were not just bombs but shaped charges, designed to focus their explosive force in specific directions. Their ships could withstand damage that would destroy any other vessel because they were built to break apart in pieces, while the rest kept functioning. And the humans themselves were even stranger. The Hive commander intercepted their communications. It heard them singing songs while their ships burned around them. It heard them telling jokes as they died. It heard one pilot, her fighter spinning out of control, use her last moments to calculate a trajectory that would crash her craft into a draft weapon platform. "See you in hell, you overgrown garden slugs," she had said. Then she was gone. The collective did not understand hell. It did not understand humor. It did not understand why creatures would choose death for the sake of others. But it was beginning to fear. On the Eternal Light, Admiral Syracuse was receiving reports from her fleet. The Volanti ships had fallen back as Vasquez requested. They were using the time to repair what they could, to save what they could. And they were watching. "Admiral," her tactical officer said, "I have analyzed human combat tactics. I do not understand them. Explain." They do not conserve ammunition. They fire constantly, even when the chance of hitting is low. They do not retreat from superior firepower. They advance into it. They do not protect their damaged ships. They use them as weapons, ramming them into enemy vessels. And yet they are winning. Yes, Admiral. They are winning. But they are also dying. I calculate they have lost nearly half their crew. Any other species would have surrendered by now. Syracuse thought about this. She remembered something she had read about humans long ago, a report from a consortium anthropologist who had studied their history. Humans came from a dangerous world. Their planet was full of predators, diseases, natural disasters. They had spent their entire evolution fighting to survive. And somewhere in that struggle, they had developed something unusual. They had learned to be stubborn. Not brave, exactly. Bravery was about facing fear. What humans had was different. It was a refusal to accept defeat even when defeat was certain. It was a willingness to keep fighting, not because they thought they could win, but because giving up was simply not acceptable. The anthropologist had called it spite. The humans had a different word for it: determination. "Captain Vasquez," Syracuse said, opening a channel again. The human captain appeared. Her bridge was in even worse condition now. Fires burned in the background. Half her crew stations were dark. But Vasquez was still standing, still commanding. "Admiral, listen all. What can I do for you? I want to understand. You are dying. Your ships are being destroyed. Why do you keep fighting?" Vasquez was quiet for a moment. When she spoke, her voice was softer than before. "Admiral, did you ever hear of a place called Earth?" "Your homeworld." "Yeah, small place. One star, one habitable planet. We spent most of our history killing each other. Wars, famines, plagues. We nearly wiped ourselves out more than once." She paused. "But we also learned something. We learned that the only way to survive was to help each other, to fight for each other, to never leave anyone behind. But you don't know us. We're strangers. Today you are. Tomorrow maybe you're allies. Maybe you're friends. Maybe someday a Volanti ship will answer a human distress call. Vasquez smiled. That's how it works. You help people, and maybe someday they help you. Or they help someone else. It spreads. And if it doesn't? If you die here and no one remembers, then we died doing something that mattered. And that's more than most people get. An explosion shook the spite. Vasquez grabbed the railing to keep from falling. Gotta go, Admiral. We've got bugs to squash. The channel closed. Sirikin stood alone on her bridge, surrounded by her crew, and felt something she had not felt in a long time. She felt inspired. All ships, she announced, prepare to re-enter the battle. The humans have given us time to repair. Now we fight beside them. Across the fleet, her officers responded with renewed energy. The Volanthi were not finished yet. Neither were the humans. And together, they were just getting started. The battle had been raging for 8 hours now. The stars themselves seemed tired of the violence. Wreckage floated everywhere, the remains of ships from both sides mixing together in the cold darkness of space. But something had changed. The Drath Collective was retreating. The Hive Commander could not believe its own senses. For the first time in its long existence, the Collective was losing a battle it should have won easily. The mathematics had been simple at the start. 200 ships against 17. The outcome should have been certain, but the mathematics had not accounted for humans. The Hive Commander had revised its threat assessment 47 times during the battle. Each time, the humans had proven the assessment wrong. They absorbed damage that should have destroyed them. They performed maneuvers that should have killed their crews. They fought with a ferocity that made no logical sense. And now the Volanthi had rejoined the battle. Admiral Sirikin had pulled her fleet back to repair during the initial human assault. Now those ships were returning, their weapons recharged, their shields restored. Alone, they would have been destroyed. But with the humans fighting beside them, everything was different. The humans had taught the Volanthi something important. They had taught them how to be angry. All ships, target the Drath command vessel, Sirikin ordered. The humans have weakened their formation. Now we finish this. On the spike, Captain Vasquez heard the order and smiled. Her ship was barely holding together. Half her crew was dead or wounded. The bridge smelled like smoke and blood and burning circuits. But they were winning. You hear that? She called out to her remaining crew. The Volanthi want to help. Let's show them how we party. The Spite fired its remaining weapons. Around it, the other human ships did the same. They were fewer now. 9 vessels from the original 17. But those 9 were still fighting, still killing, still refusing to die. The Drath command vessel was a massive thing, larger than any other ship in the battle. It carried the central node of the Hive Commander's consciousness. Destroying it would not kill the Collective, but it would break their coordination. It would force them to retreat. The Hive Commander understood this. It ordered its remaining ships to protect the command vessel. 60 Drath warships formed a defensive wall, their weapons creating a killing field that nothing should have been able to cross. The human ship Petty Revenge crossed it anyway. The Petty Revenge had been reduced to almost nothing during the battle. Its captain was dead. Its weapons were offline. Its engines were barely functional. Volkeoi, functional. Legit engines were barely functional. A skeleton crew of 12 people kept it flying. Lieutenant Sarah Kim was now in command. She was 26 years old. She had joined the Navy to pay for college. She had never expected to die in a battle 40 light years from home. But she had made her choice. All hands, abandon ship, she announced calmly. Get to the escape pods. I'll handle the rest. Lieutenant, what are you doing? One of her crew asked. My job. Now go. The crew obeyed. Escape pods launched into space, carrying 11 people to safety. Sarah Kim remained alone on the bridge of a dying ship. She aimed the petty revenge at the Drath command vessel. She pushed the engines to maximum power, burning through their last reserves. The ship accelerated toward the defensive line. The Drath opened fire. Weapons tore into the petty revenge. Armor melted. Bulkheads collapsed. Fire consumed entire sections of the ship. Sarah kept her hands on the controls. "Come on," she whispered. "Just a little further." The petty revenge broke through the defensive line. It was barely a ship anymore, just a burning chunk of metal hurtling toward its target. But it was enough. Sarah Kim's last transmission was picked up by every ship in the battle. "Hey, Hive Commander. You know what the difference is between humans and bugs? Bugs get squashed." The petty revenge hit the Drath command vessel at 3% the speed of light. The explosion lit up the void like a new sun. The Hive commander felt its connection to the fleet shatter. Millions of voices suddenly went silent. Coordination broke down. Ships that had been fighting as one suddenly became individuals, confused and afraid. And the humans were not finished. Captain Vasquez watched the explosion from the bridge of the Spite. She felt a moment of grief for Lieutenant Kim, for all the humans who had died today. But she pushed it down. There would be time for grief later. Right now, there was work to do. "All ships, this is Captain Vasquez. The Draft command node is down. They're disorganized. Hit them now, hit them hard, and don't stop until they run." The combined fleet attacked. Velanthe crystal beams and human railguns fired together. Nuclear missiles and energy torpedoes struck the same targets. Two species that had been strangers hours ago now fought as one. The Draft tried to regroup. They tried to establish new command structures. But the humans had learned their communication frequencies. Every time a new commander emerged, human ships targeted that vessel specifically. One by one, the Drath broke and ran. The Hive commander, or what remained of it, watched its fleet scatter. Ships jumped to faster than light speeds, fleeing in every direction. The careful coordination that had made the collective so dangerous was gone. They were no longer a hive. They were just insects running from a fire. Before the last Drath vessel fled, it broadcast a message to every hive node in the sector. The message contained a single classification. The humans were now designated as a Category Omega threat. It was the same classification the collective used for stellar collapse, dimensional tears, and reality-ending phenomena. It meant, do not engage. Avoid at all costs. Run if encountered. The Drath had fought 1,000 species and conquered most of them. They had never classified any of them as Omega. The humans had earned that title in a single day. On the Eternal Light, Admiral Sirican watched the last enemy ship disappear. Around her, the crew was cheering. They had survived. Against all odds, against all logic, they had survived. But Sirican was not cheering. She was looking at the human fleet, at the broken ships still floating in formation, at the escape pods drifting between debris fields. The humans had paid a terrible price for this victory. "Open a channel to Captain Vasquez," she ordered. The human captain appeared on screen. She looked exhausted. Her face was pale beneath the dirt and blood. The adrenaline that had kept her going was fading, and Sirican could see the weight of command settling on her shoulders. "Captain," Sirican said softly, "it's over." Vasquez nodded slowly. Yeah, I guess it is." She looked around her ruined bridge. "We lost a lot of good people today. You saved a lot of good people today. You saved my entire fleet. That was the idea." Vasquez tried to smile, but it didn't quite work. "Admiral, I know we have a lot to talk about. Diplomacy and alliances and all that. But right now, I need to see to my people. The ones who made it." "Of course." We will provide whatever assistance you need. Thank you." Vasquez paused. "Admiral, for what it's worth, your people fought well. Once you got back into the fight, the draft didn't stand a chance. We learned from watching you. Let's hope nobody else has to learn the same lesson." The channel closed. Sirican stood alone with her thoughts. Outside, the stars were quiet again. The battle was over. The Drath were gone. But something had begun today. Something that would change the galaxy forever. The humans had arrived. And nothing would ever be the same. 3 days had passed since the battle. The debris field stretched across thousands of kilometers. Rescue ships moved slowly through the wreckage, searching for survivors, recovering bodies, documenting the dead. It was quiet work, sad work, necessary work. Admiral Sirican stood on the observation deck of a Velanthi medical cruiser and watched the search continue. Behind her, the doors opened and a human entered. Captain Elena Vasquez looked different out of her combat uniform. She wore simple clothes now, dark and practical. Her arm was still in a sling. Bandages covered the wound on her head. But she moved with the same steady confidence she had shown during the battle. "Admiral," she said, "you wanted to see me." "Yes, please sit." Sirican gestured to a chair. "How are your people?" Vasquez sat down slowly, carefully. "We're managing." Despite his being towed back to Seoul for repairs. HFY again. She paused. "Can't say the same for everyone who served on her." "How many did you lose?" 423 humans died in the battle. 8 of our 17 ships were destroyed. Vasquez's voice was steady, but her eyes were tired. "We started with 2,000 crew across the fleet. We're down to about 1,200 now." Sirican felt the weight of those numbers. 423 lives. People with families, with hopes, with futures. All gone because they had answered a distress call from strangers. "Why?" she asked. Vasquez looked at her. "Why what? Why did you come? Why did you sacrifice so much for people you had never met?" The human captain was quiet for a long moment. She looked out the window at the stars, at the wreckage, at the distant shapes of rescue ships doing their slow, sad work. "About 300 years ago," she said finally, "there was a ship called the Exodus. It carried the first humans to leave our solar system. 5,000 people looking for a new home." Sirican listened. They found trouble instead. Engine failure left them drifting in deep space. They sent distress signals for months. No one came. Vasquez's jaw tightened. There were other species nearby. We know that now. Some of them received the signals. They just didn't think it was worth the effort to help a bunch of primitive apes. What happened to them? They died. All 5,000 of them. We found the ship 50 years later. Just a tomb full of frozen bodies. Vasquez turned to face Sirican. "That's what humanity learned about the galaxy. We learned that no one would help us. We learned that we were alone. And so you decided to help others? We decided that we would never let that happen to anyone else. Not if we could stop it." Vasquez smiled, but there was sadness in it. Every human child learns the story of the Exodus. Every one of us grows up knowing what it feels like to be abandoned. And every one of us swears that we will be different. Sirican thought about this. She thought about her own people, about the consortium and the hegemony and the ancient architects. They had heard her distress call. They had calculated the costs and benefits. They had decided that the Velanthi were not worth saving. The humans had calculated nothing. They had simply come. "Captain," she said, "I owe you more than I can ever repay. My fleet, my people, our lives. You don't owe us anything, Admiral." "That's not how this works." "Then how does it work?" Vasquez leaned forward. "Someday, somewhere, someone is going to need help. Maybe it'll be humans. Maybe it'll be another species we've never met. When that day comes, you answer the call. You show up. You do what you can. She paused. That's how it works. That's how we make the galaxy better. One rescue at a time. Sirican felt something shift inside her. Something old and cold and cynical melting away. In its place was something new. Something warm. The Volanthi will remember this, she said. We will teach our children of the humans who came to save us. We will honor your dead alongside our own. That's all we ask. No, Sirican stood up. That is not all. I am going to recommend to my government that we establish a formal alliance with humanity. Military cooperation. Cultural exchange. Everything. Vasquez blinked. Admiral, we're a tiny species on the edge of the galaxy. We've only been in space for a century. What could we possibly offer the Volanthi? Sirican smiled for the first time in days. You could teach us to be stubborn. That surprised a laugh out of the human captain. A real laugh, not the bitter humor of the battlefield. For a moment, she looked young again. Young and hopeful. I think we can manage that. They shook hands, human and Volanthi. It was a small gesture, but it meant something. It meant that two species who had been strangers were now friends. Outside, the rescue ships continued their work. Somewhere in that debris field, the bodies of 423 humans drifted among the stars. They had come to save strangers. They had succeeded. They had paid the ultimate price. But their sacrifice was not in vain. In the weeks that followed, the story of the Kepler Straits spread across the galaxy. It spread through trade routes and communication networks. It spread to species who had never heard of Earth, never seen a human face. The story told of a dying fleet, abandoned by its allies, surrounded by enemies. It told of a distress call that echoed into the void with no hope of answer. And it told of 17 small ships that came out of nowhere, fought against impossible odds, and refused to stop until the battle was won. The consortium heard the story and began to reconsider their policies on mutual defense. The Gemini heard it and quietly increased their diplomatic contacts with Sol. Even the ancient architects heard it and, for the first time in millennia, expressed what might have been interest in a younger species. But the most important change happened among ordinary people. Traders who visited human ports. Scientists who worked alongside human researchers. Travelers who met humans on distant stations and heard their stories. They learned that humans were not just stubborn. They were loyal. They were brave. They remembered their debts and honored their promises. And they never, ever left anyone behind. The galaxy had spent a long time ignoring humanity. They had dismissed them as primitives, as children, as a species too young to matter. They were wrong, because the humans had shown everyone what really mattered. Not technology, not age, not power. What mattered was showing up. What mattered was fighting for people you had never met. What mattered was being willing to die so that others could live. The humans called it compassion. They called it duty. They called it being human. The rest of the galaxy was just beginning to understand. And somewhere, on a small blue planet at the edge of the Milky Way, a new generation of humans was growing up. They learned the story of the Exodus and the story of the Kepler Straits. They learned that the universe was vast and cold and often cruel. But they also learned that it did not have to stay that way. They learned that one species, one ship, one person could make a difference. And when their time came, they would answer the call. Just like those before them. Just like humans always did.